This is one of those events that's billed as being for people of all faiths and of none, and I guess I'm the statutory none. I'm not a believer. I don't think there's a supernatural or an afterlife. I'm a fervent defender of various freedoms which sometimes run counter to equally fervently held religious principles. To be honest, I think the politicization of religion is a regrettable and increasingly dangerous phenomenon, and the most dangerous example of that is the Bush White House of the last 6 years. So why am I here? First, because in this crazed campaign of vilification, Saturday's Daily Express front page headline was "Fury over Halal Christmas Dinner." Religion is clearly a code for race. You don't have to think that religious discrimination and racial discrimination are the same thing to recognize that racial hatred is now being expressed in the vocabulary of religious hatred and not just by Nick Griffin. And of course, this coded racism is being directed at people who've been subject to discrimination, abuse and attack ever since immigration from the Indian subcontinent and East Africa began, and still are, as speaker after speaker has made clear. But the second reason I'm here is because the debate about what is unhelpfully described as multiculturalism is being used by some supporters of the left liberal social agenda as an excuse for abandoning their traditional defence of the rights of different peoples with different cultures to live here on their own terms. The success of British multiculturalism owes a lot to the efforts of black and Asian people themselves to overcome discrimination. But it also owes a lot to politicians and others, some of them here this evening, who stood up against the assimilation and repatriation agendas in the 60s and the 70s and beyond. Now we see a new fault line developing. The diggers of this new fault line include feminist writers who proclaim that multiculturalism is the enemy of women's rights, and progressive political commentators whose writings about almost everything else I admire and agree with, who see multiculturalism as an attack on Enlightenment values. It's most obvious on the continent, where previously liberal countries and literally liberal governments are banning certain forms of dress from the streets and foreign languages from playgrounds, while setting ever more bizarrely arcane citizenship tests for prospective immigrants, including, in the case of at least one German state, questions about people's opinions. As it happens, I agree with the state of Baden-Württemberg that homosexuality should be accepted and that wives shouldn't have to obey their husbands. But I'll bet not every resident of Baden-Württemberg agrees with either of those propositions. And I also believe that people have a right to their opinions, even if I disagree with them. But it's also happening here. We too have citizenship tests. Through the debate on British identity, we're developing a strangely airbrushed view of more distant history, in which sometimes it seems that Britain invented slavery only in order to abolish it, and indeed that free speech gender equality and gay liberation were clauses 1 to 3 of the 1688 Bill of Rights, as opposed to being recent, hard-fought, still controversial and insecure victories. I wrote in The Guardian in defence of the right of women to wear the veil, not because I do or don't think it's a good idea, but because, as Andrew Sunnell said earlier this evening, 24 hours after Jack Straw made his statement, 97% of the Daily Express's readership called for wearing it not to be challenged or argued against, but banned, as the burqa has been banned in the streets of several Belgian municipalities, a policy which the Dutch government seems near to applying to the whole of Holland. And it's not just Daily Express readers who have such trouble with Salma Yaqub's point that you can defend the right not to wear the niqab in countries where it's compulsory as fervently as you defend the right to wear it here. David Goodhart is the editor of a left-leaning journal, Prospect. In his latest pamphlet, published by Demos, titled Progressive Nationalism, Goodhart proposes a two-tier welfare system the teaching of imperial history in schools, the creation of a migration and integration ministry, the raising of citizenship test hurdles, the reassertion of the monarchy and the army as nationally binding institutions, the banning of certain forms of dress from public buildings, guess which, and the reintroduction of conscription. So what's to be done to counter this move? I'm never, I must confess, going to be on the same side as Iqbal Sakrani on a number of issues which I don't think are secondary or minor, but we can stand shoulder to shoulder on a civil rights agenda. Like Western civilization for Gandhi, Enlightenment values would be a very good idea. We need to call them to account, to point out the hypocrisy of people who support freedom of speech and opinion when it suits them and don't when it doesn't. To defend those civil liberties which are indeed one of the Enlightenment's most enduring and valuable legacies. To support, in my view, Muslim women fighting to admit women to mosques in Blackburn, but also to support women fighting to desegregate the upper reaches of our great national institutions, including the Church of England. Fourth, to take the free expression ideals of the liberal state seriously. I fought against state censorship of the arts, including the one I work in. Having got rid of most of that, I don't want other forms of censorship substituted, which is why I support levelling the playing field. Repeal the blasphemy laws which defend only one religion from attack. I'm less interested in beefing up the unworkable religious hatred bill, particularly if it's John Reid doing the beefing, than I am in repealing the glorification clause of the Terrorism Act, which is unnecessary in that the bill outlaws incitement already, coercive in that it criminalizes the expression of opinion, and discriminatory in that it is clearly not designed to get defenders of the ANC, the Stern Gang, the IRA, or the organisers of the Boston Tea Party. Oh, and I de-established the Church of England. And finally, to assert that while liberté is a necessary condition of social well-being and justice, it's not a sufficient condition. Indeed, in the absence of égalité and fraternité, there are circumstances in which liberté can be a tool of rejection and exploitation. In summary, to initiate a grown-up debate, not about how newcomers might assimilate themselves into a fixed and unchanging Britain, but how a mature, modern, multicultural democracy might grow and develop and deepen in the future.